Hello, fight fans, and welcome to the very first episode of Monday Night Fight Talk. I will be your host, Dylan Brewski, and I just want to take a second to thank every single person that is tuning in to my premiere episode of this new weekly show that I will be doing. Mostly focused on the UFC. I will throw in some PFL, some Bellator maybe, but this will be mostly a UFC-centric show. I also want to give a big thank you to my friends, my colleagues, Mr. Steezy A Smith and Squabbo. As some of you may know, I have been doing a YouTube/radio show with them for a few years now called the Boelt. That is every Fridays at 4 p.m. That's more general sports, football, basketball. We tap into some baseball and some other sports here and there. But I'm going to go solo now, and I'm going to do a MMA-focused show. So we might as well just get started. Let's get right into things. So, as we all know, 2 nights ago, we had the big fight night, Islam Makhachev versus Bobby Green. Obviously, that was not the original main event. Islam Makhachev was supposed to fight Beneil Dariush, but unfortunately, Beneil Dariush went down with an injury. Sounds like a broken ankle, pretty serious injury. But Bobby Green did something that almost no one in the MMA community thought that anyone would do, and that's step up and fight Islam Makhachev on 10 days' notice and 14 days after he went out and got a decision victory at UFC 271. It was a phenomenal thing to do. I know he wasn't the first person that they offered this fight to, so for him to even take this fight is pretty amazing. So big props to him, even though he obviously was not able to come out with the victory. But in reality, did we really think that Bobby Green was going to take down Islam Makhachev when Islam Makhachev has been on a complete tear through that entire division? Granted, he has not faced the greatest of opponents. He just did get his first top 10 victory versus Dan Hooker a few months ago, but for the most part, it's been low-ranked/unranked fighters that he's kind of torn through. But now we're in this weird stage where Beneil Dariush was supposed to be his big opponent. That was supposed to be the one that would actually put him on the market. Is he gonna get the title shot? Is he worthy of the title shot? Obviously, with Dariush going down with an injury, we don't know. He doesn't have the huge fight to get him there. But it does beg the question, does he still deserve a title shot? And if you ask me, I say yes. And I think that's more because the lightweight division is kind of difficult to read right now. You go through the list of the high-ranked guys. I mean, Gaethje is obviously the actual next in line. Gaethje and Oliveira are going to fight in May at UFC 274. But beyond that, unless Gaethje wins in a very, very close fight and Oliveira deserves the rematch, I don't see any other person in that division deserving of a title shot more than Islam Makhachev, even without the big, humongous top 5 win on his resume. I mean, you go down the list. Number 2, Dustin Poirier, just coming off of a loss to the champion, Charles Oliveira. Plus, we have a lot of questions. Do we know, is Dustin Poirier gonna fight at lightweight again? Is Dustin Poirier gonna fight ever again? That's really kind of up in the air. I know there's a lot of talk of Nate Diaz, them going up to welterweight, which I see most likely. If Dustin Poirier is ever gonna fight again, it will be against Nate Diaz. You go down the list again, Beneil Dariush, he just went down with an injury. I mean, his biggest win is against Tony Ferguson, who has been on a skid for a little bit now. And plus, it sounds like it's a broken ankle again. So, I mean, we don't know when this guy's going to be ready. Then Islam is number 4. Number 5, Michael Chandler, who is on a 2-fight losing streak, against the two people that are fighting for the title in May, Gaethje and Oliveira, and Rafael dos Anjos, who's also fighting. He's fighting on this Saturday in the co-main event against Rafael Fiziev, but has he earned the title shot again? I don't think so. So ultimately, at this point, again, unless it's a really close fight between Justin Gaethje and Charles Oliveira, and we deem it's worthy of a rematch right away, I don't see any other fight that makes sense other than Islam Makhachev fighting for that title. But I'm not going to go on and on about Islam and stuff in the future. I want to talk about the other fights that happened last Saturday, because it was an absolutely phenomenal fight card. I mean, every single fight, you were kind of on the edge of your seat. There was never really a fight that you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of dragging, this is kind of boring. They were all very intriguing fights, and it started from the first fight, and we'll start with that one. Carlos Hernandez getting a split decision victory over Victor Altamirano. You could tell from the start that Altamirano wanted to get this fight on the ground, but Carlos Hernandez was very good on his takedown defense. And even when Altamirano would try to get in close and try to clinch up, it seemed like every single time they would release from the clinch, or even Altamirano would go to get in the clinch, he was getting hit with a knee, and that was really stopping Altamirano from trying to go to the ground. But then again, Altamirano was holding his own on the feet too. I was very surprised by that. I did not think that he was going to be able to go toe-to-toe striking with Carlos Hernandez. I thought it was a close fight, but on the feet, I thought that Carlos Hernandez had a very big edge over Altamirano in that aspect. But Altamirano really held his own and kept it very, very close. Ultimately, Carlos Hernandez did come out on top with a split decision victory, but it was a great way to start the card. It was a great fight overall. Unfortunately, we go from the close fight to the very, very lopsided victory of Ramiz Brahimaj over Michael Gilmore. Ramiz just kind of dominated this fight from the start. It wasn't a very long fight. He got a takedown within 30 seconds. He got to the back 10 seconds later, not even, actually, and he just worked his way to get the rear naked choke. I wish there was more to talk about with this fight, but that was really this whole story, was Ramiz just absolutely dominated Michael Gilmore. But Ramiz is definitely going to be a problem in that division come a few years, gets enough fights under his belt, but he is an insanely good grappler. He is insanely good at jiu-jitsu, so I can't wait to see what he has in store in the future. And that leads us to another decision that, yeah, it was a unanimous decision, but it was still a very, very exciting fight between Jonathan Martinez and Alejandro Perez. It was kind of weird to me because we saw a lot of kicking offense with Jonathan Martinez, and you don't see a lot where I feel like the entire first round, I don't think I saw Jonathan Martinez throw a single punch. He was just kicking and kicking and kicking. And I wish he would have shown off the hands a little bit more, because we all know he is a good striker, but I get it. Perez is a great grappler. You're trying to keep your distance, and those kicks kind of help you keep the distance. But overall, Perez did come back. First and second round, at the end of it, he caught Jonathan Martinez. And if there was more time, I don't know if Jonathan Martinez wins that fight, because it was so, especially the first round. The first round, he was in big trouble, but he got saved by the bell. Ultimately, though, the pure volume of Jonathan Martinez won him that fight. We did get to see a little bit of his striking ability. In the third round, he kind of let his hands go a little bit more. But for the most part, we saw heavy kicking offense. But hopefully down the road, Jonathan Martinez does bring in the strikes a little bit better, because I think he is a phenomenal striker, and obviously he can use those kicks to a very big advantage. Next up, we have another lopsided victory. Terrence McKinney submission victory over Fares Zaim. Terrence McKinney is on an absolute tear right now. I believe it's now 5 straight first round finishes in his last 5 fights. And going into it, his last 4 combined times in those fights was 2 minutes. This one went a little bit longer. It went 2 minutes. But, Terrence McKinney took him to the ground straight away and then just worked his way to the back and ended up getting the rear naked choke victory. Again, kind of like the Ramiz fight, there's not a whole lot to talk about because it was kind of a total domination when it came to Terrence McKinney on that fight. And then moving on to the first women's bout of the night, Josiane Nunes versus Ramona Pascal. This fight was pretty lopsided. Pascal had her moments. She got a couple takedowns, but at the same time, I almost feel like Nunes kind of beat her on the ground. Even though Nunes was on her back the whole time, she was hitting her with those elbows on the top of the head, and Pascal was kind of just laying on top of her. She didn't do much. But once it got to the feet, Nunes just absolutely dominated that fight. She was hitting her left and right. She has tremendous power. And that's actually a bantamweight that moved up to featherweight to fight Pascal. So that was a big thing, especially with someone that was 5 inches shorter than their opponent. You don't see a lot of that happening. But Nunes had a great fight. She kind of dominated. It was a fun fight overall, but not much more to say other than Nunes won the fight, and it wasn't really a question, even with the takedowns that Pascal was able to get. But moving on to the last prelim, Ignacio Bahamondes with the submission victory over Rong Zhu. This was a weird fight because going into it, Zhu weighed in 4 pounds overweight, so we're kind of like, what's his cardio going to be like? Is this maybe even going to work to his advantage? And it did not really work to his advantage. Bahamondes kind of won this fight fairly dominantly. Zhu had his moments. He got a good couple strikes in, but for the most part, Bahamondes was almost perfect in this fight. He was absolutely phenomenal, and he ended up being able to get the submission victory. So big props to Bahamondes and even his corner, everybody involved with that fight, because he almost fought perfectly. But moving on to the main card, the first fight, it just continued all the way through this entire night of great fights. Armen Petrosyan versus Gregory Rodriguez. This fight was kind of the classic volume versus power type fight where Petrosyan was just nonstop going forward, hitting him. But Gregory Rodriguez was kind of reserved and would look for his opportunities, and every time he connected with Petrosyan, it hurt Petrosyan very much so. But ultimately, volume got the best of him in this fight. Armen Petrosyan did get the split decision victory. Props to both of them. I don't think this was a fight where either one of them lost. It was a great fight from both of them. It was just more the volume got the best of him. But moving on to the next fight, the very, very violent Arman Tsarukyan versus Joel Alvarez, where Tsarukyan got the TKO victory. I'm surprised this fight went to the second round. I thought the doctor was going to stop it after the first with that nasty cut where Alvarez was just covered in his own blood. His nose was just pouring blood after a vicious elbow. But they let him go on. Ultimately, Tsarukyan dominated the second round just like he did the first and ended up getting the TKO victory in the second round. But man, it's not fun. It's almost not fun to see stuff like that happen, because there was just so much blood, and I'm honestly so surprised that they did not stop that fight after the first round. But ultimately, they let it go. Sarukian still won in dominant fashion. Another amazing women's fight that happened on Saturday night was Priscilla Cachoeira versus Jae Young Kim. Cachoeira obviously came out with the unanimous decision victory, but I was honestly surprised by that with how the judges had been scoring most of the night. Like I said, Petrosian kind of won off of the sheer volume of his strikes more than Rodriguez's power. And this was kind of the same story with this fight. Kim was more of the aggressor. She was very technical, not landing the most dominant strikes, but still landing in volume, and they still hurt Priscilla. But Priscilla came back. She had a phenomenal third round. She was very aggressive, and she had so much power in her shots that honestly, again, this is another fight that could have gone either way. But ultimately, Priscilla came out with the unanimous decision. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, that was Wellington Turman with the submission victory over Misha Serkinov. This fight was a very fast-paced, back-and-forth grappling match. There was three separate instances where I thought that the fight was going to be over. Obviously, only one of those turned out to be the fight being over. But, I mean, in the first round, Turman gets on his back, and he has the rear naked choke almost locked in, and you're kind of like, ooh, he might tap on this one. But Serkinov was able to get him off of him, get on top of him on the ground. And then Serkinov gets a great north-south choke that I did not think Turman was going to be able to get out of. But he ultimately did. It goes into the second round. Serkinov gets back on top, and he's hitting him with some ground and pound. It's looking really good for him. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you blink your eyes, bam, Turman has an armbar. He wins the fight. It literally came out of nowhere. If you have not watched it, I highly recommend you go watch this, because it's crazy how fast he just got the armbar in and Serkinov tapped. So overall, again, it was a great night of fights. I know a lot of people seemed a little disappointed. There was only 2 ranked fighters on the entire card, with Benil having to step out. But ultimately, the fights made up for it. You don't really need ranked fighters to have great fights. It was great fights from start to finish. But ultimately, the biggest message I have to say is Islam deserves the next title shot. He really does. There's no other fight that makes sense other than giving Islam Makhachev the next title fight. But that's enough about fights that have already happened. We obviously have a very big pay-per-view coming up, UFC 272. And really the biggest question leading into this pay-per-view is this main event worthy of a pay-per-view main event between Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal? I see a lot of controversy all over social media about this. And honestly, I gotta say, I think people are rightfully concerned about whether this should be a main event on a pay-per-view. I get it. This is a very heated rivalry. These guys do not like each other. But at the same time, I'm not too sure that either one of these guys is big enough to main event a pay-per-view without a title being on the line. Jorge Masvidal obviously already has one time before, but let's be honest, that was because of Nate Diaz. Jorge Masvidal, yeah, he brings in the big name, but Nathan Diaz is an absolutely ginormous name when it comes to the fight game. So, again, I just don't see it as a main event. Co-main event, this would be an absolutely terrific co-main event of the evening. But, I mean, these guys got one combined victory since the start of the pandemic. That's over 2 years. And they have, or almost 2 years, and they have one combined victory against a guy that's not even in the UFC anymore, in Tyron Woodley. So, is it going to be a good fight? I think so. A lot of people think that this fight's going to be a very, very one-sided fight. They think that Colby Covington is the clear-cut better fighter than Jorge Masvidal. I'm seeing scorecards, if it goes to decision, 50 to 43, 50 to 42. People don't think this is going to be a close fight at all. And while I agree with them that Colby Covington is the better fighter in this fight, these guys know each other very well. They used to be teammates. They used to be friends. They know how the other one thinks. So I think it will be close. Ultimately, I do think Colby Covington will win this fight. But I don't think people should be counting out Jorge Masvidal the way that they are, because he still is a good fighter. He's still a very dangerous striker. But again, ultimately, Colby Covington is the better fighter in this matchup. I think Colby wins by decision. But again, a lot closer than people think. I could see Jorge Masvidal taking 1 or 2 rounds. But I would say probably 49-46, Colby Covington taking the win on this one. But, I mean, again, this fight may not be big enough for a main event on a pay-per-view, but the rest of the fight card is still a phenomenal fight card. And one fight I want to talk about before I talk about any of the others is Marina Rodriguez versus Yang Xinan. The reason I want to talk about this fight first is I think it is absolutely ludicrous that this fight is not on the main card. This fight has probably the most at stakes of any other fight, immediate stakes, that is. I personally believe Rodriguez has a great argument that if she wins this fight, she's next in line after Carla Esparza for the strawweight championship picture. Because obviously Esparza has victories over both Rodriguez and Yan Xinan, but Rodriguez has been on an absolute tear lately. She's beaten 3 top 10 strawweights in Amanda Ribas, Michelle Watterson, and Mackenzie Dern all in a row. And then Xinan she was having a good stretch. She won her first 6 fights in the UFC, but then ran into Carla Esparza. Like I said, Carla Esparza kind of dominated her. So Xinan may have to do a little bit more than just win against Marina Rodriguez to get in the title picture. But ultimately, I think Marina Rodriguez will win this fight by decision. And I personally believe if Marina Rodriguez wins this fight, especially if she does it in the fashion that I believe she will, that Marina Rodriguez puts herself right in the title picture with another win over a top 5 opponent in this division. But we'll move on to the main card fights, or some of the main card fights. First off, we'll start off with the co-main, Rafael Dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev, sorry. Luckily, this fight was able to be rescheduled. As some of you may know, 2 weeks ago, there was a fight night that this was supposed to be the main event for, but Fiziev had some problems with his visa, so they had to postpone it, and they were able to do the co-main event for this matchup. But I am very, very excited for this fight. Rafael Dos Anjos, we all know, the former lightweight champion. He's kind of making a comeback down to lightweight, starting with Paul Felder last year. But he's a crafty veteran. I mean, people know who RDA is, and he can beat anybody at any time. But he's going against this young and upcoming guy in Rafael Fiziev, who is an absolute powerhouse striker. Every single time he makes contact, you hear the slap, the snap, anything. It's so crazy to watch him fight because he just has so much power, and his gas tank is ridiculous. He can just keep going for 3 rounds and just dominate. Ultimately, Fiziev, I think, has the advantage of this fight. He's younger. He's more powerful. He has some big-time wins where, yeah, RDA humongous wins, but those were a while ago. He actually went on a streak where he moved up to welterweight, and he did not do too well at welterweight. But maybe the lightweight will be a revitalization of his career, but I don't see that against Rafael Fiziev. I think Rafael Fiziev is very, very hungry right now, and I think he wants this victory because it will just skyrocket him in the rankings to be a veteran guy like RDA. There are some other intriguing fights here. Edson Barboza versus Bryce Mitchell. There's a lot of controversy surrounding Bryce Mitchell right now. He had an interview with Ariel Helwani where he supported some views that have not been so popular, but he's still a great fighter. I mean, we still gotta give him credit in the octagon where it's due. This is the classic striker versus grappler matchup. Edson Barboza, we know for being an unorthodox striker, highlight reel knockouts with the spinning back kick, other knockouts where he's been very good on the feet, where Bryce Mitchell has been an absolute menace on the ground. He's one of those that he's a grappler and he just smothers you the second he gets you on the ground, and he'll make you lay there for a long time and wear you out. Ultimately, Edson Barboza has kind of been on a little bit of a decline where Bryce Mitchell has just been on a tear. He's won his last 5 fights in the UFC, and ultimately I think that continues to go on for a 6th straight fight. I do believe that he will finish Barboza in the 3rd round by a submission. I think Barboza's just going to get smothered and ultimately make a mistake on the ground where Mitchell is able to grab a submission on him. The next fight I want to talk about is Kevin Holland versus Alex Cowboy Oliveira. I know a lot of people, when they heard Cowboy versus Holland, they thought it was Donald Cerrone versus Kevin Holland, including Kevin Holland. He actually had an interview with Ariel Helwani, and he was talking about, they called him and was like, "You got to fight with Cowboy." And he was all like, "Oh, really? Wait, what Cowboy?" And they said it was Alex Oliveira, which, I mean, it's still a good fight. Alex Oliveira is obviously a veteran of this game, but he has been on the decline. He's lost 3 straight fights. Kevin Holland also hasn't had the greatest history in the recency sense. He had the no contest against Dawkins, but before that, I mean, he faced Marvin Vettori. Granted, that was on short notice, but he got smothered and beat up for 5 minutes. Same with the fight before that in Derek Brunson. But those were both at middleweight. He's now back down at welterweight, which I think he's a lot more comfortable at. Plus, Oliveira is an okay grappler, but he's not the greatest grappler. He's not up there with Brunson and Vettori, and he's not as strong, obviously, as Brunson and Vettori. So I think Holland's going to win this fight, and I think he's going to win it fairly quick. I have it as a 1st-round knockout by Kevin Holland to get him back in the win column, and maybe he stays at the welterweight division and he makes another run like he did a couple years ago, where he kind of ran up the rankings of the middleweight division, but then obviously got stumped by Brunson and Vettori. The last fight I want to talk about for next Saturday is the premier prelim fight, and that's Jalen Turner versus Jamie Mullarkey. If you like finishes, you're going to like this fight. Both guys have an average fight time of under 10 minutes, and both have never won a fight in the UFC that went to decision. So I see this fight being over. I don't see this fight going to the judges, to say the least. I ultimately think that Jalen Turner has brought a submission game to his arsenal. He has the last 2 wins that he has by submission, and I think he's going to try to use that to his advantage instead of trying to just go toe-to-toe with striking with Mullarkey. Ultimately, I think it will go to the 2nd round, but Jalen Turner will get the submission victory over Jamie Mullarkey. But other than that, that's really the big fights that I see on Saturday night at UFC 272. again, I want to thank everyone that was able to tune in. I want to thank everyone that motivated me to get to this point. I know there was some times where even I was like, I don't think I'm going to do the solo YouTube show. I don't know. But I finally did it. I got to give big props to my friends Squabo and Steezy A Smith, who, again, I do the Bolt with every Friday at 4. But they have been my biggest motivators. They have been the two people that have hounded me the most to make this YouTube show. And I can finally do it. But if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube. You're already here. You might as well subscribe. And also, you can find me on Instagram at Monday Night Fight Talk. And you can find me on Twitter at MN Fight Talk. But see you guys next time. Same channel, same place, same everything. Mondays at 5 p.m. where I'll give you my reaction to UFC 272. And I'll probably give you a little what my predictions are for the next fight night the weekend after that. But until then, I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great week, everybody.